Welcome everybody to Africa Talks, to edition number 24, our last episode of series number 3. I'm more than honored to introduce my co-host for today from Namibia, Sipiwe Lutibetsi. Good to have you in the show, Sipiwe.
Thank you very much, Marco. I am Sipiwe and I'm looking forward to co-hosting Africa Talks and discussing African and European topics with the alumni of the International Journalist Network, IJP, and our distinguished guests.
And as you all know, like after the 24th edition, Africa Talks is designed as a digital platform for the exchange of knowledge and ideas between journalists, experts from civil society, from economy, and from science from both continents. I'm Marco Vollmer. I'm a member of the board of the IJP programs, of the International Journalist Programs, IJP.
And our topic for today is hydrogen, the savior of the energy crisis. The energy crisis resulting from the Russian attack on Ukraine has fundamentally changed the framework conditions for the energy supply worldwide and the turnaround in Germany and the European Union. Green hydrogen is set to transform the energy landscape and economy in Northern and Southern Africa, with several large-scale hydrogen developments planned for construction in the upcoming years. Due to the strong decrease and uncertain future of the pipeline-bound natural gas supply from Russia, new market conditions for fossil gas are currently settling in Germany. This also directly affects hydrogen as an indispensable energy carrier for a future climate-neutral energy system. On the one hand, the rapid rise in natural gas and electricity prices has a direct impact on the economic conditions for hydrogen production. On the other hand, the EU in particular has significantly increased its targets for the electrolysis market ramp up since the war. Can hydrogen help to overcome the current energy crisis? And how can the African continent benefit from these developments?
These and other questions we are going to discuss right now with our distinguished guest. We speak with Salim Fakir, Executive Director, African Climate Foundation. Prior to establishing the ACF, Salim served as the head of policy and futures unit of WWF South Africa for 11 years. Salim has worked as a senior lecturer at the Department of Public Administration and Planning and as an associate director for the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy at Stellenbosch University. Prior to that, he served as director of the World Conservation Union South Africa for 8 years. Salim has served on a number of boards and is prolific writer who contributes regularly to leading South African publications like Engineering News, Business Day, and the Daily Maverick. Welcome to Africa Talks.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you, colleagues, Sipiwe, Gunnar, and nice to see Simon as well. I had a good opportunity to meet Gunnar a while ago, so wonderful to see him.
Great. And our second guest is Professor Simon Roberts. He is a professor of economics at the University of Johannesburg, where he founded the Center for Competition, Regulation, and Economic Development. He is a global practitioner at the University of Strathclyde. Simon has been an economics director at the UK Competition and Markets Authority and the chief economist and manager of the Policy and Research Division at the Competition Commission of South Africa. Simon has advised competition authorities, regulatories, and governments on competition matters in many developing and middle-income countries, especially in Africa. And he has testified as an expert witness in a number of major cases in South Africa. Simon, it is good to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Gunnar Herring is Chief Executive Officer of Enatrag SE since 2022. He joined the company in 2014 as Chief Financial Officer and member of the Executive Board. Enatrag is a renewable energy company based in Brandenburg, Germany, the eastern part of Germany. They develop, build, own, and operate utility-scale integrated energy plants in 10 countries globally. Our plants produce reliable electricity and green hydrogen exclusively from wind and sun, is what they write on their homepage. Prior to his time at Enatrac, Gunnar spent 12 years at the Boston Consulting Group as Associate Director and member of the Global Energy Practice Management Team. He received his PhD in nuclear physics from the Technical University of Darmstadt. Welcome to Africa Talks, Gunnar.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So let's get started with our talk. Gunnar, Hyphen was established as a joint venture between Enatrac's South African subsidiary and Nicholas Holdings Limited as the project company. The project is expected to produce 300,000 tons of hydrogen and other green fuels, such as green ammonia and green methane per year, and ship them for export. It will require an electrolysis capacity of 3 gigawatts, fed by 5 gigawatts of photovoltaic and wind power. A port for shipping the fuel will also be built directly at the production facilities. Could you please share with us what is the current status of the project?
I'm happy to do so, but let me just quickly start with a bit of history to the project, because as a project company, we have to thank the Namibians and the Namibian government for having the vision to embark on this hydrogen journey, which started already 3 years ago, with Namibia looking at the green hydrogen opportunity and connecting the dots by looking at the vast potential of wind and sun in Namibia, by looking at the vast area which is available for such developments, and back at that time starting to talk to a lot of international experts on how to start such an industry. And 2 years ago, that went into the pathway of a world-class organized tender, where Namibia selected one specific area where they wanted to start, which is in the southern part of Namibia, close to the South African border. And that's a very specific area because it has been historically the center of the diamond mining industry for almost 100 years. And for that very reason has been closed off to the public. It's called the Sperrgebiet, and it has an area of about 25,000 kilometers. And this area is not inhabited because of the diamond mining. And at some point in the last, for about 20 years ago, it was put under protection as all the coast of Namibia. And as such, it's very rich in resources, and it's a very good place to start that development. And during that tender process, 6 international consortia participated, and the tender then was evaluated by an expert panel, including world-renowned experts. And Hyphen, the project consortia, which were gladly to be a part of, became preferred bidder out of that bidding process. And if we look at that development, for us, what made Namibia so attractive that we wanted to participate in that bid, because Namibia is at the forefront of being very attractive for international investments among the African country, because it's a democratic state. It has a very long history of very stable conditions. It has a very well-functioning court system, all those things which are essential for massive capital deployment and international investments. And just coming directly to your question on where do we stand now? So after being awarded preferred bidder status, we on the one hand side started immediately with initial project development work, preparing environmental studies, preparing engineering work, starting a wind campaign, which is about to start very soon, to measure exactly the resources which is critical for financing of such a project. And at the same time, we're working on a contractual setup with the government, which is called a feasibility and implementation agreement, which sets out the responsibilities of the heights and consortia and the government and puts it in a contractual basis in the lack of a current dedicated hydrogen legislation, which still is in the process of the making.
Thank you. May I add one more question, like for your introduction, Gunnar? How should one imagine the cooperation and collaboration with the Namibian partners?
Well, to develop that industry, Namibia and the Namibian cabinet set up the so-called Green Hydrogen Council, which comprises cabinet members together with industry association and experts to the field. And this Green Hydrogen Council was mandated to guide the industry development. And in our daily work, we're working closely with that Green Hydrogen Council in setting up all the necessary steps to develop the project. And there's a very close interaction. And what I very much appreciate, especially from the Namibian side, is that that we are dealing with a group of people which is highly dedicated, and they're also let me put it this way, I mean, we are going the extra mile, and we see the same on the Namibian side. There's a huge effort, even though it's very clear that for a project of this scale, there is a lot to be learned on both sides on how to actually develop that. And some things are faster, some things are a bit slower, but that's very normal. And so far, for us, it has been a very, very good experience, and we have built a very trustful relationship between the consortium and the Green Hydrogen Council, which of course is key to work very efficiently going forward.
Thank you. Salim, from what perspective are you looking on that project? Certainly from sustainability, from a climate protection point of view, what is your opinion on that project?
So firstly, I just want to explain a little bit of how the African Climate Foundation works on many of these issues. I think we have two lenses that we look at when we tackle climate issues. The first is, I think the narrative we have is around the climate development nexus. We are interested in climate issues in terms of how they are important in the development, economic development trajectory of different countries on the continent. So we need to understand the impacts of climate risk. So in other words, very extreme weather patterns and the impact they're having. For example, we've seen with Cyclone Freddy, the impact it has had on Madagascar, Mozambique and Malawi. So we look at those in terms of the economic impacts they are having, because what they do is they set back the development investment that are already being made, and it can actually also increase the debt burden of countries if the climate stresses continue the way they are. And if we don't have mechanisms within the state, particularly in terms of fiscal allocations and also international support, because half of this, a large part of this is not the result of the countries that are impacted, but it's a result of a global community that has industrialized in a particular way with fossil fuels. And that's the effects we are seeing. As we always say, climate effects are global, but the liability has been localized, particularly in countries that are affected. The second part is that we also recognize that the global decarbonization is an opportunity for new kinds of investment, as we're seeing with the push for green hydrogen, particularly from the European Union. And our interest is really to see how we can, on the continent, We have vast resources, not only in terms of solar, wind. Let's not forget availability of land. It's a vast continent. In fact, it's even though there are 1 billion people, it's sparsely populated compared to Asia and other parts of the world, including Europe, given the size of the continent. So there's a lot of land. There is also mineral resources, and there are other endowments that the continent have. Our responsibility is not just to push the climate agenda, which is to try to maximize the opportunities for increasing investments that make sense on the continent, because for example, renewables are getting cheaper. It ought to be part of the broader energy mix, not just fossil fuels. Green hydrogen is a new trajectory of work. It's not necessarily going to be utilized on the continent, other than potentially South Africa, where we must talk about that. And I think Guna needs to also maybe share some insights on how the Namibia Hyphen project can interlink with a highly industrialized economy like South Africa, where we have the need for ammonia, for green steel, for hydrogen, for fuel cells, etc. I think one of the questions I have for Guna is how sure are they that they will have longevity in the demand, because that is crucial for the Namibia project to succeed. So when we look at these promoting investments on one side, we're also very interested in the social justice aspects as much as we are interested in the environmental issues. I think what the Hyphen project, for me, is a very large-scale endeavor. It's sort of a experiment in an arena where there is some level of learning that has to be established. There isn't a mature industry in Namibia itself. So there are lots of safeguards that have to be put in place. We need to understand what those safeguards are. Guna mentioned that it's happening in a national park, as I understand it. There are environmentalists that are very concerned about that. We haven't talked about the use of seawater and the marine impacts. There's issues around that. And I think we need to listen to that, and we have to find ways to manage those impacts. And there's a town that's suddenly going to be having 15,000 more people in Luderitz, for example. And the question is, who's responsible for providing services and infrastructure for the people that are going to move in it? Because lots of projects of this scale have a boom period, and then they can go through a bust period, depending on the economics of the project. So while we have concerns and issues around social justice, environmental, we are still in favor of giving these large-scale projects a try. They are necessary. We would definitely want to see more regional integration. I think there's opportunities to oversize some of the generation capacity, not necessarily in the electrolyzers, but in renewables that could potentially be of value to South Africa. And I think there are discussions with NamPower to look at potential surplus energy that's generated that can be exported to South Africa. There are benefits, as there would possibly be also side effects that may not be positive. We need to go into this with open eyes, but I don't think anybody's saying stop it. People are saying, look, let's try it out. Let's make sure that these kinds of deals are not extractive, like many deals have happened on the continent, where people have come, invested, in this case, taking green molecules away and leaving the sites in which these developments happen not better off than they were before. So we definitely need to see increased beneficiation in this arena. I have to also declare that we are providing support to the Namibian government, a very small amount. And we had provided some funding as a foundation, as a philanthropy, for the development of the strategy for green hydrogen. And we are also looking at, we are supporting some through technical assistance, the implementation authority that is giving oversight over these forward planning for more projects, and also ensuring these deals have proper safeguards and that there's mutual benefit, that it's not just one party taking on the risk. Usually, when you do these kinds of deals, the big players, Electrolysis is not necessarily a big player in this compared to, ANEL and other players. But generally what happens is that risks can be conferred onto and socialized by the Namibian state, while the companies get away with profit. So we don't want to see that kind of exploitative situation. And I hope Gunnar doesn't mind me being open about it, because I'm sure he will have also heard about this. So I do think we have to be open about this discussion about potential. The model could be purely extractive with no benefit to Namibia, and all the positive benefits go to entities outside of the Namibian economy. So we definitely don't want to see that, because if that happens, I can assure you, countries like Mauritania, Kenya, Egypt that are starting to open up the new deals in this arena will look very closely at the Namibian investment. The last thing I think it's a question for Gunnar. There's a lot of developments of, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act. China is busy building out. We just hear in the news lots of Chinese deals, for example, a big Chinese deal in Egypt and also within China. How that would have implications for the Namibian project that they are pushing, given that a massive subsidy is being put out by the new Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and how does he see that in terms of the impact on the financial viability and economic viability of such a project? And lastly, has the offtake agreement been secured, or is that still outstanding? I hope he doesn't mind me asking these questions. Thanks.
Not at all. Thank you, Salim. We give Gunnar, we give you the opportunity directly to answer on this point, and then Simon, you come in the discussion with a broader view on the macroeconomic side of green hydrogen, because you published a white paper in December, as far as I know, and we will have then the broader scope. But first of all, maybe Gunnar, if you have some answers for Salim, I think that would be very helpful.
Yes, Salim, thank you very much for your questions. I noted them all down, and I hope that we find the time to touch upon all of them. And just to start with, what I already mentioned and which I want to repeat here again is that when we are having a discussion around extractive behavior of certain companies, we really need to see who is the horse, who is the rider. One needs to be very precise on that. And so it's very important here to say that it's a Namibian vision. It's the will of the Namibian government, and I think that every sovereign state should have the freedom to develop its own economy. Of course, there's an expectation that this happens in line with international standards and international ambitions in terms of meeting the climate challenge. But it's the Namibians who drive that, and we see us more as a company supporting the Namibian government in achieving those goals. And on top of that, Hyphen is a Namibian company. We happen to be shareholder, and of course we are providing a lot of expertise, especially in the first places. But it's a Namibian company, and we're hiring Namibians. And 10 years in the future, it's going to be a Namibian company that also will benefit from the value generated. If we look at the setup that we proposed also in the tender, and which is now what we work on, we're looking at, first of all, an opportunity where Namibia as a country will benefit tremendously. I mean, first of all, due to the large scale of the project, it will support the 2030 objectives of Namibia to be the first country in Africa to be fully decarbonized. So there will be so much green electricity available also at times when the sun is not shining and the wind does not blow, through a reconversion of hydrogen, so that there will be reliable green electricity available for Namibia, especially in a setup where currently Namibia largely depends on electricity imports from South Africa, and that in the current situation where everyone looks at South Africa and they have a huge shortage of electricity, so this will already not only benefit Namibia as a country, but it will also implicitly benefit South Africa meeting its electricity challenge. When it comes to the benefit of the local economy in terms of job creation, this is a huge opportunity, but also a huge challenge at the same time. So if we look at the numbers, on the long term, what is important is the long-term jobs in the project. And the number that we look at is about 3,000 direct employees. Of course, all those employees will have families. There will be a large supply chain which is being built up in Namibia. So there will be much more indirect jobs, which so far we typically don't quote because those numbers are always kind of difficult to assess, and we don't want to create too much excitement about that. At least not at this stage. And those job targets are firm commitment from the Hyphen Consortia, and they are also baked into our contracts. So it's something that we have to comply with. And we're already very busy in setting up and planning training facilities to upskill those Namibian workers. And just in terms of the numbers, our commitment is from these new jobs, 90% of those will be filled with Namibians, which is necessary, in order to develop Namibia. And it's also the right thing to do because it needs to be a Namibian project and not a project where some workers are flown in for a certain time period from some of the countries that helped to build the stadiums in the Middle East for the soccer championships, or some other countries who have models where they bring their workers along. And what is also important on that one is on the supply chain. We have committed to localize roughly 30% of the capex based on local supply chains. We are already busy talking with certain suppliers on, for instance, localizing wind tower manufacturing. And so far, looking at the huge demand from Namibia, this is all going very well. When I now come, or if I look at it in a more comprehensive way, from the overall direct value that the project is creating, Namibia as a country benefits with more than 50% of that value. So we have very detailed calculation on that. So the majority of the value goes to the Namibian government. We have various channels, be it land rentals, be it taxes, be it royalties. So there's a large number of factors that we have committed to. And that's also something which I think is absolutely important. And if I look at it in a very comprehensive view, I think it's a very fair setup, that reflects a true partnership and is definitely not extractive. And the environmental challenge is there. So certain areas of the Sperrgebiet and the Transkaup National Park are highly biodiverse. You know? So this is a fact that we have been aware of from the very start, and which has been baked into the design of the project by mapping out all those areas and creating buffer zones around those, you know, so that those environmentally sensitive areas are excluded, and there are extensive studies going on with local environmental practitioners who know the area by heart, you know, who also are fully dedicated by their heart to conserving the environment, and who will definitely make sure that there is no adverse impact there, you know. And just on the numbers, yeah, I mean, from the actual footprint of our project, we are touching only about 2 to 3% of the overall area, you know. So it's not that the whole area is being covered. And on top of that, and that's maybe the last point to mention here, is the project has also been designed in a very specific way that from the solar farms and wind turbines, we're transferring that power into green hydrogen, and then we're moving the electrons to the port, because putting a pipeline there is much less invasive as putting a extensive transmission infrastructure especially in the coastal areas, which are more sensitive than some of the inland routes. So maybe I stop on the environment part. Of course, there are a lot of more details. Yeah, all that sums up to a last important point there. That is, we envision to finance this project on a project financing basis. You know, which means large amounts of international capital will go directly into the project, and there will be a lot of scrutiny by the international commercial banks who provide that money to check the project in the very last detail, whether it complies with the highest standards of lending on an international level, yeah, following the IFC guidelines. You know, this is a big difference here on how oil and gas projects are typically developed, yeah, which are the other huge mega infrastructure projects. And also it's different to mining projects, where those players capitalize themselves somewhere in Europe, and then they just deploy capital. So the individual projects are not looked at in such a detail as in our case, and therefore I believe, even though it's not always easy, yeah, I think we're applying the highest standards.
Thank you, Gunnar. And now we bring Simon into the discussion, because Simon, as I said, you published a white paper in December under the title "Green Hydrogen for Industry and the Challenges for an Entrepreneurial Regulatory State." What are, from your perspective, the industrial policy and regulatory challenges for South Africa as a country, but also for the Southern African countries like Namibia or others? Could you give us here your input, please?
Sure, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. It's a working paper rather than a white paper. I should clarify. And before I go into the first question, just also a little bit of background. The research center that we established at the University of Johannesburg looks essentially at markets. It looks at markets which are regulated, such as energy markets, telecoms markets, but for our purposes, energy markets. Also looks at how competition rules are written for market participation. And we think this is a very big gap in many ways in the discussions that are happening around green energy, because actually I think the regulatory regimes need to catch up with the big changes that are happening. The changes that are happening in energy are a bit like the changes that digital platforms are bringing in kind of online retail and search. But we're not seeing the regulatory regimes catch up. And this is going to lead to lots of problems with resolving disputes, which are inevitable, I think, down the line. I do think this is something that urgently needs attention. I also want to link to the debate that's just been happening between Salim and Gunnar. And it's really good to hear this kind of exchange happening. Start by saying it. I mean, the essential issue, I think, is how do these things link to the growth and development of the continent? Because if they don't link to the growth and development of the continent, and South Africa is the poster for this, right? If it doesn't And I think Namibia is in a different situation, and our work is mainly on South Africa. But if it doesn't link to this, then those societies will not be stable. And it doesn't matter how many protections you have in place. It's actually essential for the energy transition that we think in these terms and learn the lessons from the past, such as the extractive investments in minerals. And we need to learn these lessons very fast. I think that what I welcome from understanding about and learning about the Hyphen project is, in actual fact, it's showing us the questions that need to be faced up to, and it's allowing us an opportunity to learn about how to do this, building the local supply chain, looking at the environmental standards, and these are things that South Africa will benefit from if these lessons are learned. So we think that this has got to be understood in the context of essentially the ongoing industrial and economic development challenges. So we're talking about in green hydrogen, we're talking about energy, which is largely for hard to abate industries. Essentially steel, chemicals, cement, and also things like shipping fuel through green ammonia. And I think we tend not to understand it in these terms. Because if we understand these terms, we need to then think about what's going on in those industries currently in countries in Southern Africa, and how does this impact on the cases that we need to make for the role of government and engaging with the large investors, which we need to be part of this. And I'm going to pick up just on ammonia. But I'm going to point to the fact that ammonia is mainly used for fertilizer, and in Southern Africa, explosives. And you may think, well, why is this? Well, explosives are going to be used to mine the copper, which is going to be used for the renewable energy. So in actual fact, green ammonia for explosives is actually quite important for the renewable energy supply chain. Zambia being one of the biggest, Zambia and DRC border being one of the biggest reserves of copper in the world. But the other thing is ammonia is used for fertilizer. Nitrogen is 70% of the plant nutrients, and this is essential for food security. And this is really, if you like, I think linking these things up is a crucial test case for whether we can start to think in these systems terms. And we have to think in these systems terms. Why? Because at the moment, the cases that are being made around ammonia are saying, well, look, it's going to cost more to make green ammonia than gray ammonia. We need $100 a ton carbon tax is typically what's put in place, and that will equate to $200 a ton difference in ammonia. But that assumes the world price of ammonia applies in Southern Africa. That's not true. Fertilizer, the main benchmark fertilizer in Southern Africa, is around about $400 a ton more expensive than the world price. In other words, right now, there's an economic case to be making green ammonia for fertilizer. So right now, we should be thinking about local industry linkages, not focusing solely on the export of green ammonia. I'm not saying we shouldn't be exporting green ammonia, but what worries me about the Hyphen project, and in the main context, I think it makes sense, is that it's an enclave for export. But from the context of the industries in Southern Africa, we've got to be thinking about these linkages. This matters massively for food security because some of the best areas to expand agricultural production without deforestation are in Africa. Zambia is one of the best cases in point, with large amounts of available land, water, etc. The productivity of that land and the potential to grow it depends on the price of fertilizer. Right now, those fertilizer prices are astronomically high, way above the increases in world prices from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Russia-Ukraine invasion, and much bigger than the carbon taxes that are being proposed. So where is this strategy to build the transition for greening that key industry? And steel is actually, in a sense, similar because it's the critical upstream metal for much of downstream manufacturing, including infrastructure development, which needs to happen. But we're seeing the plans, for example, in Bukobai, which are supported, I know, in the context of some of the European plans by some of the German steel industries, looking at exporting really unprocessed steel, sponge steel. We're looking at just going to export the steel to green the German industry, which is a good thing. We should green the German steel industry. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't support that. But the real question is whether this is part of a broader-based industrial development of Southern Africa with all these linkages in place.
This time I give directly because it's so nice that we have the direct exchange between economy and science or civil society. But Gunnar, I will give you directly the opportunity again also to give your thoughts on this points.
I mean, this question also links up with Salim's question around regional integration. Yeah, And if one looks at the southern African region, and the local demand for green hydrogen, especially from in hard to abate sectors, there's you look at various steel plants. We can look at Secunda and Sasselberg, where currently chemistry is done based on coal, which is from the CO2 footprints, one of those places which emits the most CO2 on a global basis. And as Anatrac, we're also in South Africa, and we're also working with those players, finding a pathway to transition into a green future. And of course, if one looks at it from a target perspective, let's say in 20 years from now, it's very clear that there will be hydrogen pipelines connecting the different areas of production, be it in the Northern Cape of South Africa, be it in Namibia, and connecting those with those classic industrial centers. So from the target picture, that is very clear. When it comes to how do we actually get there, there's currently still an ongoing discussion on how to do that in an economic sensitive way. And if you look at the current setup, I sometimes wonder whether it's a similar situation with electric cars 10 years ago, where Tesla entered the field, and they entered it with luxury cars. So they first produced the most expensive electric cars. And of course, back then you could also have asked, but we need, of course, if we wanted to decarbonize, we need a lot of affordable electric cars. But sometimes in the startup of the industry, in the beginning you have high risks. You need to have customers who are actually able to pay enough, to kickstart that industry. And in that sense, if I go along with that comparison, I think it makes from a development perspective totally sense, especially for Africa, to first try to gain all the benefit from, let's say, delivering that product, to those customers who are willing to pay a lot of money for it, because carbon prices, be it in Korea, be it in Japan or Europe, are much higher. And then to use all those products, to make or to go down the cost curve, and then to be able to meet the price requirements in Africa. So that's how I see it. But I fully support your point that at the end of the day, we need to decarbonize all of the world, and not just the richer parts of the planet. And that is at the forefront of the things that need to be done. And those regional perspectives, they, as a vision, need to be put in place very early on, so that everyone knows how is this going to evolve. Where are the things that we need to do now? Because looking back at the discussion 5 to 10 years ago, everyone was just saying, hey, hydrogen, it's green hydrogen is just going to be very expensive. It's the efficiency losses in the production, and we may just need that in 20 years from now. But as we embark on that journey now, what we see is to ramp up that green hydrogen industry, in a way that it is available in 10 to 20 years from now. We actually need to start now, because there's so much work to do. And it's not only about let's say those of course these environmental questions and social justice topics, but also on a national basis, lots of very hard to crack questions in terms of what is actually green hydrogen. How do you define it? Certain questions around pipelines, what are the specifications, and so on. And all of these processes where you need alignment of many partners, none of that goes fast. We need it fast, but there's also a reality, and we just see that currently in Europe with the delegated act, which is supposed to define what green hydrogen is, and it just takes such a long time just to decide on that, and that's just blocking investments.
The discussion is getting exciting. 22, there was the launch of the African Green Hydrogen Alliance with the intention to foster collaboration and ensure the continent is able to lead in the development of green hydrogen for energy transition. Salim, what do you think about the green hydrogen strategies from Southern Africa and from Germany? Would like a short, brief answer from you, please.
So I think what I think fundamentally is, and this is clearly what Simon also raised, and I think it's a perspective we also hold. What I find useful about the sort of investment drive to increase investment, particularly in green hydrogen, renewables. I think there's also discussions around storage technologies, particularly battery technologies and so on, is that 5 years ago, if you were to look at the African continent, these issues were not on the table. They were very project focused, not about major, large scale, what I would say, systemic type of investments that have implications for countries' national economic growth and development. This is the first time I see, having been in this field for quite a while. So there is some level of coordination also needed on the continent. We have some opportunity to do that around the Continental Free Trade Agreement. For example, there's an advisory group being established to look at localization and industrial development, using the levers of the Free Trade Agreement to coordinate. And I think there will be material for all types of green investments. So there's a growing awareness of the opportunity. What I think we need to guard, and certainly as a foundation, we are looking to increase support for increased coordination, a lot more African input into these discussions, so that we're not only just recipients of views from one side, but we also have the infrastructure, intellectual and other types of analytical infrastructure to be able to engage the economic benefits on a more serious basis. That we don't have, as Simon said, a repeat of what has happened with the extractive industries. But one thing we have to find a way to deal with is that there could be every country, Mauritania, Kenya, Egypt, Morocco, Namibia, could have a race to the bottom. And we don't see the bigger picture, which is what I think important of Simon's message. And this is what we have to see in the African Green Hydrogen Alliance, that we have to try to find a way to locate the bigger picture. I don't think that's just the responsibility of companies like Enetrag or Hyphen. It has to be each of these members of the alliance have to look at the interlinkages. So I would say that in the green space, that even though one is looking at green hydrogen as a discrete investment area, there is overflow and overlaps with renewables. There's overflows with battery, including EVs. In fact, they're so intersectional from the technology space point of view. We have to increase that sort of conceptual frame. Simon, even in your white paper, when you look at it, and I think you're starting that, is to try to, even though they may not be relevant now because we are so focused on driving particular types of investments, over time there will be these interlinkages that we have to they will create almost a kind of, I would say, critical mass of investments in different areas, but they have intersections. And we have to find more stronger regional approaches and institutional mechanisms to make sure that, for example, what Simon is talking about, that green hydrogen is not only just addressing the generation of green molecules that can be exported through the medium of ammonia, but that it also intersects with, given what he's just mentioned, that we are paying $400 more for hydrogen anyway, that the green hydrogen produced in Namibia might just be competitive enough for us to be able to, even if it's $200 less, feed into the fertilizer industry. That's a piece of work that we on the African continent have to do more. It will also guide the national approach to drive investments in Namibia, and I think there's a huge scope for Namibia to at least in the Southern Africa space, integrate a lot more of these investments into the regional context. And I hope that we can work with the Namibian government and other parties to try to build that. But I'll leave it at that for now, Sipiwe. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Simon, we'd also like to hear from you in terms of collaboration. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, one of the kind of starting points for the center that we've been building is that these markets are all regional. The companies are regional. If you don't, if people say that there's problems with regional integration, well, the supermarkets are integrating the region. They're doing that. The mining companies are doing this. They're transporting. The sugar companies are exporting sugar from Zambia to Europe. So this we need to understand this first of all, and then we need to look at the opportunities. And I know this is very much where Salim's coming from as well. We're very much aligned on this. And I think the danger is that we want to find the kind of ideal structure, and this is where we spend there's a lot of time being spent on the AfCFTA. And instead, we need to think about this is going to be very messy, and we need these examples like Namibia is showing, which are entrepreneurial. And we need to not say, well, is it right or wrong? We need to say, what do we learn from it? What do we learn from it, and where do we go forwards? And I think in this, it's really important that we think about what are the demand side pull factors. One of the demand side, I think Gunnar pointed out, which is that South Africa is a test case, not because just of the potential of renewable energy, but because it has, some of the most emitting industries in the world, the highest point source, I think, of CO2 in the Southern Hemisphere. So it really is the test case of unlocking. It has the renewable energy endowment. It's the potential for green hydrogen. What I'm pointing to is that there is this demand side in terms of these industries. And right now, Namibia, we are importing, as South Africa, are importing ammonia, pressurized, liquefied, all the way to the inland of South Africa to manufacture fertilizer and explosives. And you're in terms of Enertrax looking at exporting ammonia, which could then be put on a ship and brought all the way back again. This is the reality right now. In other words, we are already paying for the luxury car. I think on this, we're paying this incredibly high price. Even though, of course, a lot of ammonia is manufactured, from this incredibly emissions-intensive production process. So I think this cooperation is essential because these are regional footprints of demand. These are regional footprints of investments and infrastructure that need to happen. And the last thing I'd want to say is that South Africa has not been good at this, and we have a problem when we go and work in other countries. Say, well, you're coming from Johannesburg. South Africa just wants the region to buy our products. And we as South Africans and research centers based there, we have to change this mindset to see in actual fact, region integration is a strength. It will build resilience. And I think businesses understand this, but I would want businesses to also step up and say, we could do much more if we had a regional integration framework instead of deals that made sense, because that would actually provide an environment for us to invest and hold us accountable, us as businesses accountable in this process. But it has to be regional. These countries are not islands, I think, and businesses realize this. I think politicians realize this. But I think breaking through to make the deals that are practical in terms of impacting on investor decisions and outcomes for jobs and employment is probably the biggest challenge that we face.
Thank you, Sam. A quick answer on that, Salim, and then we're coming to
sure. I just want to say that our view, particularly as African Climate Foundation, is that we hold a vision that the nature of the climate and development diplomacy has to catch up with the rate of and pace at which the wave of investments that are starting to happen, China, Europe, etc., that there will be spillovers onto the continent. We have to actually take approaches that are very different from traditional climate diplomacy, which has been focused very much around the international agreements. What we are doing now is we're entering into a trajectory in which the climate debate is moving into the mainstream economic discussions, and we've not caught up with that. And we have to actually find ways in which those elements become stronger in the discussion on climate issues on the continent. Secondly, I think our vision is we think that a regional approach to these green technology waves and investment are really an opportunity to integrate the region a lot more, given the value chains around critical minerals, the demand areas where, for example, South Africa has to play a bigger role in actually also being a major off-taker of some of these green technologies. And there are also financial capability that can be built to ensure that the cost of these investments are reduced over time. And because we're not taking a regional approach, we are effectively extracting solar and wind and then importing the technology back at a more higher cost, and we have to find ways to reduce that. So I hope lastly, I would say why we need to do this is precisely what Simon said. It's not about learning from extraction, but learning by doing. And if we don't do this, we can complain about everything in the world, and we don't actually understand what the realities are on the ground, and we can learn from it. And we need to find institutional mechanisms to absorb the learning so we can actually better the kinds of deals that we do on the continent as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you. And now, finally, Gunnar, what are your next challenges coming up with the Pro, and what are your final thoughts on this?
Yes. Let me just add one thought to this regional discussion. The same way as we are being challenged in terms of what type of partnership is there between Europe and Africa, and as a European investor and local companies, the same way or the same topic applies to the partnership amongst countries in Southern Africa. So this regional integration will just require that there are two partnerships at eye level, and once that is being achieved, I think everyone can benefit from it. And sometimes, and I see there's more of a discussion in terms of who gets what slice of the pie, and less focus on how can we jointly make the pie bigger. And sometimes what I also see is that all of this happens in an international environment. And currently, personally, my biggest worry is the following. We see that various regions and countries embark on this hydrogen strategy. And some of them pursue a very protectionist and nationalist strategy like the US. While I totally can understand that the US say, let's use our own renewable resources to make green hydrogen, and let's support that market ramp up with extensive subsidies. Of course, there's a huge collateral on the development of the industry on a global level, in terms of them making their local market so attractive that a lot of the resources that are available in the supply chain, on the EPC side and so on, they're all shifting to the US, which is in a way a big challenge for those other regions who may not have access to the capability to provide such huge subsidies. And it's not just the US with the IRA. It's the same situation if I look at Middle East and how projects are being financed with basically zero interest rates, which is a huge subsidy for all high capex projects. And in that sense, I think it's absolutely essential from an African perspective to actually find partnerships on a global level, to ensure that this ramp up actually happens, and that other region, that they're not basically pushed out by other regions by heavy subsidies, which may require that some of the partners like Europe have to jump in for geostrategic reasons. And that is maybe now last from a European perspective, the most important thing here, if you look at the oil and gas world today, we have some countries who have ultra low production costs. We talk Middle East about $4 per barrel. You know, we look at oil prices above $50 per barrel. So each barrel creates more than 40. Production cost $4, $46 profit on that. Yeah, if I would own a house in Germany and if I would charge my tenants, let's say 50 times more than my cost, yeah, I mean, this would not be socially acceptable, but this is the reality today. Yeah, and that creates, of course, also certain geopolitical developments, which I believe are not healthy if you look at the future and if you look at it from a European perspective. And there, hydrogen provides a huge opportunity, not only for Europe, but also for those countries with rich resources, because the resource differences on the hydrogen side, there are maybe at most 40% if I look at southern Spain and if I compare it, for instance, with Namibia. So it's only 40% of the cost difference, and it's not 10 times between Middle East and the US, yeah, which means that on the diversity side, Europe and those other importing regions, they have a vast range of producing countries which can benefit from that boom. And at the same time, even though if I would be personally asked, yeah, if I want to make a huge profit, I would think twice about it, yeah. But it's actually not healthy, yeah, to create an industry which is ultra profitable. Yeah, it creates a lot of challenges to a local economy, and in that sense, hydrogen is absolutely great because it's a more digestible way of an industry development, and it also allows a very clear pathway to bring more industry in a second step to those countries. Yeah, and we're already seeing this. Yeah, we do not stop with green hydrogen. We go to green ammonia. In Namibia, there are also projects around direct production of iron ore. And once you have the iron ore locally, of course, some of the steel plant manufacturers also going to think of locating there. But that's maybe the third or the fourth step that we look at. And now it's important to manage the first step, and that's what we are committed to, and that's where we will need all the help and all the support, not only in Namibia, but also from the broader community in Africa and Europe.
Thank you very much. We've run out of time, unfortunately. Would have loved to continue this conversation. This was the 24th edition of Africa Talks on the topic hydrogen, the savior of the energy crisis. We hope that you enjoyed your time with us, and a big shout out to our 3 experts.
Thank you, Gunnar Herring from Enertrack. Thank you, Salim Fakir, and thank you, Simon Roberts. I think that was a very fruitful discussion we had. That was our last episode of this 3rd series of Africa Talks. We hope and we are optimistic that there might come a 4th series in autumn. For now, thank you all very much. Goodbye, take care, stay healthy. Goodbye.